shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets, we shall fight in the hills, we shall never surrender.
Welcome to A Radio. I'd like to thank you for joining me on A Radio this evening. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank Hutch Bailey Jr. for mentioning me on his programme, Cold War Radio. I believe there's going to be some major alterations with Cold War Radio, so we'll have to stay tuned on that. Just keep looking at my website and I will update you on that when it changes. I will put more links on my website and you can find it there. If you go to my website, which is Change Ontario, all one word, at .wix.com/change, that's changeontario.wix.com/change. We're also available on Twitter at Change Ontario. Our Facebook page, there's a link on our website, and our email address is changeontario, all one word, at outlook.com. And if you're interested in advertising on A Radio, you can contact me on my email address. After that shameless promotion, on with the topic of tonight's show. Tonight's podcast is, well, they all are really, an unusual one. It's on an industry, if you like, within Canada, based in Canada, and having tentacles pretty much all over the world. This company has exerted an inordinate amount of control over every Canadian's life without them even knowing. Tonight's podcast is about one company, a corporation. It's the Power Corporation of Canada. This next piece is an overview of the Power Corporation, a little piece that I've inserted, plus most of the references comes from a website which is Reference for Business, and I will put the link on the webpage later. And it goes like this. The Power Corporation of Canada, who are they, and why is it so important for you to know about them? Well, let's look at this organisation that I came across by accident. The Power Corporation of Canada started off surprisingly, yes, you guessed it, in Quebec. Well, not really. Its roots go back to Western Canada, actually, Winnipeg to be precise, in the mid-1800s. A gentleman by the name of Geoffrey Hall Brock recognised that farmers needed some sort of protection from the drought years, so he created the Great West Life Assurance Company, which was incorporated in 1891. There's far more information about this on the website, but I'm kind of skipping over it because it's very, very detailed and it's not all relevant to what we're doing here. In 1906, the company crossed the border and established US operations in North Dakota. The next year, Great West topped all Canadian companies in paid-for business. More growth took place. Come to the next period, the decade of the Depression was ended. By the end of the outbreak of World War II, which stimulated employment industry activity, the life insurance industry was dramatically revived and between 1939 and 1945, Great West enjoyed tremendous growth as well as an expansion in the United States into Indiana, Missouri, Ohio, Kansas, California, and Pennsylvania. Business in the United States grew rapidly, and by 1973, Great West was licensed in 28 states and the District of Columbia, and had opened a marketing office in Denver, Colorado. The company separated its Canadian and US operations, except for investment and the corporation operations, in 1979. It also opened companies US headquarters in Denver that year, but by then, Great West Life was opened in 45 states. From 1979 to 1983, business nearly doubled. In the mid-80s, the company's structure changed. Great West had been a joint shareholder policy owner company, which is quite a mouthful, from its inception until 1969, when Investors Group acquired controlling interest in the company's common shares. Investors Group was acquired, and here's where the link comes in, by the Power Corporation. The Power Corporation, a Montreal holding company with interests in publishing, pulp, paper, financial services. In 1969 and in 1984, the Power Corporation formed the Power Financial Corporation to hold Great West and its other financial services companies. The origins of the Power Corporation are that the man behind the Power Corporation, or the men, were two financiers, A.G. Nesbitt and P.A. Thompson, principal partners in Montreal investment firm named Nesbitt, which people might know of that from Nesbitt Burns, I'm assuming, which is part of Bank of Montreal. Shortly after its founding in 1912, the company began investing in Canada's hydroelectric utilities. Nesbitt and Thompson feared an incursion onto Canadian ground from the US and a probable end to their underwriting investment activities. To help keep Canada's power sector in Canadian hands, the pair resolved to form a holding company that would serve as an umbrella organisation for a family of affiliated Canadian utility companies. Consolidation became Nesbitt's and Thompson's mode of defence. The Power Corporation of Canada formed in 1925 and became an instrument through which financiers could ward off hostile threats from foreigners. In the intervening years, the company grew when in 1968 the Desmarais era began. A native of Ontario, Sudbury to be precise, Desmarais was 39 years old when he became chairman and chief executive of the Power Corporation. Desmarais used it as its foundation from his growing father's business. For that would become a business empire. He acquired other business lines in Ottawa, his bus service. He acquired other bus lines in Ottawa, Quebec City, and throughout the province of Quebec, and then diversified his interests into life, insurance, newspapers, communications, real estate, and by the time of the share exchange and transaction with Power Corporation, Desmarais' core assets included ownership in provincial transport, major interurban bus line, and a majority of Toronto-based Imperial Life Assurance, a raceway, a radio station, and various real estate properties. Further, Desmarais' TCCF also controlled Gesquelati, whatever that is, which controlled La Presse, Montreal's largest, most respected daily newspaper, as well as 62% of Le Journal, which is Trans-Canada 3 daily newspaper, and 10 weekly newspapers in Quebec. In the 1980s, ended with the sale of one of Power Corporation's two principal operating companies. Although Desmarais were not looking to sell the company's stakes in Consolidated Bathurst, he could not refuse an unsolicited offer made by Stone Container Acquisition Corporation in January 1989. Stone Container offered Power Corporation $25 per share for its interest in pulp paper concern, representing one of the largest deals in Canadian business history. Power Corporation received more than $1 billion Canadian from the deal, giving the company financial means to explore new business opportunities in the 1990s. The company's coffers received another substantial windfall 2 months after the divestiture of Consolidated Bathurst. In March, the parent company of Bell Canada offered more than 500 million Canadian dollars for the shares held by Power Corporation in Montreal Trust. In the 90s, Desmarais brothers took control and did not shy away from imprinting their mark on the Power Corporation as they guided the company towards its 75th anniversary at the beginning of the 21st century. Shortly after they inherited control of the company, Paul Jr. and Andre sold the company's interests in Southam, whatever that is, for $294 million. The following year, the company, through Great West Life, paid $3 billion for London Life Insurance, which controlled London Life Insurance, a Canadian insurance company with the largest sales force in the country. The acquisition made by Great West Life Co., the largest health and insurance company in Canada, employing more than 7,000 financial representatives. There is much more a detailed review of this on this site, and I will put a link to it at the end of the program. However, what I am finding most striking is that there is no mention of what was popping up in the background, and more importantly, I feel, is that how this corporation was delving deeply into the politics of Canada and controlling virtually every aspect of it. More to follow after this. This next piece is from a website, Able Danger, and the link I will put on the end of the show. And it's clips from this site. It's not in any particular order. I'm just pulling out pieces of it because it's very, very long, and it's very, very detailed, and it's got links within links, and then there's a map on there which will blow your mind. Anyway, it goes like this. Two corporations that have consistently been looked at by Able Danger researchers are Bombardier and BNP Paribas, which is a bank, I think. Paul Desmarais Sr. was on the board of Bombardier, or Bombardier as I like to say, and currently sits on the board of BNP Paribas. From the diagram, which I've talked about above, Nadimi Ushi, cousin of Saddam Hussein, should also be noted. Related to Able Danger's economic forensics for his involvement in BNP Paribas and the Iraq Oil for Food scheme. First, who is this Nadimi Ushi, whatever his name is? He's an Iraqi-born British millionaire who, according to one report, set up a variety of deals for Saddam Hussein in his regime prior to 1991 Gulf War, and is one of the largest private shareholders, or was, of BNP Paribas, which is a French bank. The bank that trafficked most of the funds involved in the UN Oil for Food scandal. He also admitted taking kickbacks from French petroleum companies such as Total Elf in the 1990s, and Oshie later sued Elf for entangling him in criminal activities, according to Forbes. Oshie is apparently still appealing the 2003 fraud conviction in France. He visited, this is the interesting thing that you're not going to expect I'm going to say. He visited Chicago and Detroit in 2004, but wasn't allowed back in the country in 2005. Now here's somebody else you might recognise. Prosecutors in the Mr. Rezenko's case have said that Rezko asked Illinois officials to help obtain a visa for Mr. Oshie's visit to Chicago, the Times said. Mr. Rezko is the guy who sold the house that everybody talks about that Obama bought for $1 million that was worth $5 million or something. Interesting connection, I thought. The officials have not been identified, and Mr. Obama's campaign has said he was not involved in that effort. The London Times has, however, discovered that State Department documents in Illinois recording that FinTrade Services, a Panamanian company, where have we heard that country mentioned recently, lent money, this is interesting, to Mr. Obama's fundraising campaign in 2005. FinTrade's directors include Ibtishim Oshie, which is the wife of Mr. Oshie. Mr. Oshie's spokesman declined to respond to the question about whether he was linked to this business. I bet he did. Power Corporation of Canada made headlines in 2005 when it was revealed that the man handpicked by the UN Secretary General to probe the UN scandal-soaked Oil for Food programme, Paul Volcker, had not disclosed to the UN that he was a paid advisor to the Power Corporation. Volcker was obviously too close for comfort to the same companies he was tasked to investigate. This was a clear conflict of interest, as the Power Corporation had ties to the French oil giant Total, which was being investigated under the Iraq Oil for Food programme for lucrative contracts to develop and exploit Mujin and Najar Umar oil fields in southern Iraq. Paul Desmarais Sr. also sits on the board of Total as of 2003. He's passed now, but Total is currently building a pipeline in eastern Burma. The project has caused the violent relocation of thousands of people and has used forced labour. The Total Unlocal, whatever it is, Yadana natural pipeline is one of the largest sources of revenue for Burma's despotic regime. In no particular order, in 1960, Maurice Strong hired former Prime Minister of Canada, Paul Martin, he wasn't former Prime Minister then, to work for Paul Desmarais Sr. Later, Paul Martin became President of Canada Steamship Lines, a subsidiary of the Power Corporation. And in 1981, Paul Desmarais sold the company to Paul Martin and his friend Lawrence Pathy for $195 Canadian million. Paul Martin went on to make his personal fortune as the owner of Canada's steamship lines. Several prominent former Prime Ministers of Canada have been connected to the Power Corporation over the years. The former Prime Minister of Canada, the 20th Prime Minister, John Chrétien, sat on the board of the Power Corporation subsidiary, Consolidated Bathurst, in the late 1980s before he became leader of the Liberal Party of Canada. John Chrétien's daughter, France, or Francie I should imagine, is married to the son of Paul Desmarais, Andre. Also, Jean Chrétien's chief of staff, Eddie Goldberg, worked in the past for the Power Corporation. Former Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney, also has a relationship with the Power Corporation. Brian Mulroney's friend, Ian MacDonald, described Paul Desmarais Sr. as Mulroney's mentor in the business world, and it's believed Mulroney has done legal work for the Power Corporation since the end of his term as Prime Minister. Also, former Mulroney Minister of Transport Don Mazalowski is currently a consultant with the firm Gowling Laffer Henderson LLP. He also serves as a director or trustee for a number of companies, including Weyerhaeuser Corporation Company, ATCO, Shaw Communications, and the Power Corporation of Canada. And it goes on, doesn't it? And we'll be back. This next piece is from the Rebel Media, Ezra Levant, and he discusses Trudeau and links to the Power Corporation. And we'll be back after this.
Remember when Justin Trudeau was asked the question, other than Canada, what's your favorite country?
There's a level of admiration I actually have for China.
He wasn't kidding there. Trudeau's transition team, that is the people charged with getting him ready to take over government, getting him ready to run the country, that transition team is being led by a top China lobbyist here in Canada. His name is Peter Harder. He's the president of the Canada-China Business Council. But it's not a hobby for him, it's how he gets rich. Harder's on the board of directors of Power Corp. They have massive contracts in communist China, including, for example, they built the Beijing to Tibet Railway, a political project designed to swamp Tibet by bringing in millions of ethnic Chinese settlers to stamp out any lingering Tibetan culture or politics. So forget about civil liberties or democracy being part of the Canada-China political discussion now. It's not just that communist China is back in the driver's seat in Ottawa now, or at least in the front passenger seat while Trudeau drives. It's that Power Corp itself is back. They're the massive corporation that was the power behind the throne of pretty much every Quebec politician for a generation. It's run by the billionaire Desmarais family. In case you don't know, Andre Desmarais is the president of the company. He married Jean Chrétien's daughter, France Chrétien. Jean Chrétien went to work lobbying China literally within weeks of stepping down as prime minister. Oh, and Paul Martin? Well, he became a millionaire by working for Power Corp and their subsidiary, Canadian Steamship Lines. Oh, and Bob Ray? Well, his brother, John Ray, is an executive vice president over there too. Oh, and just in case you think it's only liberals, well, Brian Mulroney has a relationship so close with the Desmarais family, he says he's like a brother. And now the Desmarais are back. Power Corp is back. It's almost laughably absurd that a company that has half a dozen or so former prime ministers and other senior politicians under their thumb would call themselves Power Corp. I mean, if that were a novel or a work of fiction, the editor would say, no, it's too obvious. It's overdone. But why not? Power Corp is back in power with Justin Trudeau. They hated not having a man on the inside during the Harper years. Now they do. Justin Trudeau is their mascot, but look, he's a lightweight. Peter Harder's on the job now. He'll set things right. Oh, and don't be surprised if Jean Chrétien himself gets right back into the middle of things. It's not personal, people. It's just business. And you thought it was, what was that Justin Trudeau slogan again? Oh yeah, that's right. Real change. Yeah. Welcome back, Power Corp. For the Rebel.media, I'm Andrew Levine.
This article I found purely by accident because, let's be blunt about it, there's a lot of information which I was looking at a few months ago when I was doing general research, which seems to have disappeared, shall we say. Anyway, I found this article and I'll tell you where the link is after the show. I will put the link in on my website, but I'm not going to publish it ahead of time to give people warning to remove it. But just to the folks out there, I've got a copy of it, and if it disappears, I can put it back up. So this article goes all the way back to 1973. A gentleman by the name of Douglas Fisher, and the title is Power Corp, Liberals Too Closely Linked. Ottawa. If you did not know much about the Power Corporation of Canada, it is better than 50-50 bet that you will before the next federal election and the next Quebec elections are over. This is back in 1973. The intrusions of this massive holding company into the political process has been known for some time. Power Corp ranks with perhaps ahead of Braskem and Chemcell as a corporation interested in sustaining the political process, especially the Liberal Party in that process. A few examples of recent stirrings will explain my predictions on Power Corp as politically newsworthy. A young American reporter from the Wall Street Journal, Mitchell Lynch, has been stationed in Ottawa for several years. At a panel sponsored by Media Club of Canada, he sharply challenged Canadians who roll their eyes piously about Watergate. This is around the Watergate period, and there's an article next to this talking about Watergate. Lynch was taken aback at the apathy of the press and the Canadian public at the implementation of the War Measures Act in 1970. There has never been a full explanation of why it was implemented. A fair observation in the US, said Lynch. The public pressure for an explanation would have been enormous. This subheading is heavy hand. This brought on a Quebec journalist, Claude Devereaux, who was upset by more than the War Measures Act. He went into what he called a regime of censorship. This is Pierre Trudeau period, which owns that Power Corp, which owns several Quebec newspaper media, e.g. the biggest daily, the La Presse, put its heavy hand on the media. We don't know, said Devereaux. Who owned whom? If the Power Corp owned the Liberal government, or the Liberal government owned Power Corp. Another mention of Power Corp brought an irritated response from Trudeau. In the Commons recently, Ed Broadbent, NDP Oshawa, noted that Jean-Luc Pepin, the defeated Minister of Industry, Trade and Commerce, had been appointed to the boards of two corporations, Power Corp and Bombardier. Both these corporations, Power Corp, through subsidiaries, have substantial grants from various federal programs, including some under the aegis of the Industry, Trade and Commerce Department during Pepin's ministry. Broadbent thought this relationship to the corporations of Pepin's merited some explanation. Trudeau took umbrage at Broadbent linking Pepin with the heralded government policy conflict of interest. I might say, said Trudeau, that the type of conflict and legislation and policy we are preparing does not cover the future conduct of defeated politicians. The subheading Liberals involved. Another NDP MP, Terry Greer, Toronto Lakeshore, was puzzled at the line of questioning Bruce Mackenzie, the ex-minister, now simply the MP for Verdun, took in the House of Commons examining the work of Statistics Canada. Mackesy seemed more concerned about the data on the international unions in Canada and their improvement than fitted with his previous deep experience in the field as the most able Minister of Labour. Greer was concerned to find Mackesy has taken up an appointment as personal consultant with Canada Steamship Lines, which is a 100% owned subsidiary of Power Corp. Another former Liberal minister, Maurice Savy, is a top executive at Consolidated Bathurst, a partially owned subsidiary of Power Corp at this time. Paul Martin Jr. is a rising executive leader within the Power Corp structure. Claude Frenette, sometimes credited with being the brightest and fastest promoter of the emergence of pro-April 1968, whatever that means, of Trudeau as the Liberal leader, is another Power Corp executive. Frenette was an executive assistant in Ottawa to Savy, and in the past 8 years he has held many positions of importance in the federal Liberal Party structure. Madame Savy, of course, is the Minister for Science and Technology. This isn't even the beginning of the sketch of the connections between Power Corp and the Liberal Party. When it is filled in, the interweaving between men of Power Corp and such federal advisory bodies as the General Adjustment Assistance Board of Canada, the Canada Development Corporation, and the Advisory Council of the Department of Regional Economic Expansion. Dedicated men is the subheading here. Most of the executives of Power Corp and its subsidiaries whom I have met operate in Quebec. All of them are busy, attractive personalities dedicated to both federalism and important roles in the economy and government for French Canadians. It is not the inclination for most of us who agree with such dedication to cavil those who pursue it. Yet it is more wholesome for our politics that such massive corporate complex should have an unusually close identification and interpenetration within the government of Canada and Quebec. Power Corp, through its major and minor holdings, is shipbuilding, housing, television, newspapers, pulp and paper, household credit, life assurance, glass, oil, gas, etc. Given the cornucopia of government largesse in grants, subsidies, etc., in so many of these fields, the relationship of such a grant with federal and provincial government departments and agencies is bound to be continuing. It also raises questions on how close the identity and interlinks should be at the political level of the ministry and its advisory committees, and the Liberal Party and its officials and financing. The questions are at the nub of what seems fairly certain to be an interesting public debate. It is my intention to follow it closely, particularly by setting out soon the details of the triple vertical mosaic of the Power Corporation, the Liberal Party and the Ottawa Ministry. This article was in the Toronto Sun in 1973, and I have to tell you, there's no evidence of that article that he is referring to anywhere. Okay, I have found an additional article which I'm not going to detail, but I will put a link to it on my website, and it further adds fuel to the fire concerning Maurice Strong, Paul Martin, and the others, all linked to the Power Corporation. And really, it does kind of highlight where the Power Corporation maybe have got some of its money in the past. Who knows? You read the article, you be the judge. And I'll be back after this. this next piece is a little confusing, but bear with me. And it's from a website called fortraders.com. I will put the link on the end of the broadcast. And I'm just saying this. If you're looking for a link between Power Corporation and other activities, here's one. And I'm sure there are others. Bombardier or Bombardier as I prefer to say, is a company that has serious problems and needs a load of money, like there's no tomorrow. And on the board of directors are a number of people. But here's one that will make you think a bit. How about Sheila Fraser, the former Auditor General? She's on the board of directors of Bombardier. That's just one example. And here's another one, just to pique your interest. Mr. Pierre Baudin is an independent director of Power Corporation of Canada and an executive chairman at Bombardier Incorporated. He is on the board of directors of Power Corporation of Canada and Bombardier Recreational Products Inc. Mr. Baudin was previously employed as President and Chief Operating Officer of Bombardier Aerospace, President and Chief Operating Officer of Bombardier Recreational Products Inc. and the President of Bombardier Business Aircraft. He has also served on the board of Power Financial Corp. Now here's another item which is also linked, and this is in the Global Mail, and I'll also put the link on the website at the end of the programme. Here's something else from a recent article in the Global Mail. Now this is, and I must emphasise, maybe and maybe nothing, but reading through this article I noticed a familiar name. Now there may be no connection, but I don't know. This article is basically talking about the need for Bombardier's heavy finance from the federal government, and of course when the Liberal Communists got in, they were bound and determined to give Bombardier as much money as they want, particularly as it comes from Quebec, and they're very biased towards Quebec. This is a little clip from that article, and as I say, I will put the link on the website at the end of the programme, and it goes like this. Records show Mr. Belmere talked to Bill Hawkins, Principal Secretary in the Prime Minister's office, on July 29, as well as Lawrence Hanson, an assistant to Deputy Minister at Industry Canada, and Francois Desmarais, the department's Director of Policy. He also talked to Mr. Hanson 3 weeks into the writ period on August 24th. Well, I'm not going to say any more, but it may be a common name. I don't know, but we'll be back. Coming up now is a report. It's called the Corbett Report, and he's done a very long report, quite detailed to be honest with you, on the Power Corporation, and I've edited it down because some of it I've already talked about, but take a listen to it. It is edited, and there will be a link to the full version on my website, but I think it'll give you the feeling for what a lot of people think is going on with the mainstream media will not touch. And after this long clip, we'll be back.
Now, who is Desmarais, and what is his role in all of this? Well, for a little bit more on that, let's turn to this article, which says, quote, Desmarais, the CEO of the media and financial services giant Power Corporation of Canada, is said to be worth well over £20 billion. Sarkozy has frequently described Desmarais as a mentor, saying in 2008, "If I am president today, it is in part due to Paul Desmarais." In February 2008, Sarkozy returned the favor by giving Desmarais the Grande Croix, Great Cross, of the Legion of Honor. One of Desmarais' daughters, Sophie, was married to Éric Lemoine de Sarigny, a former close advisor to Sarkozy, who has also been implicated in the so-called Bedencourt affair. During his presidency, Sarkozy was frequently accused of solely being interested in the super-rich. The super-rich indeed. Well, Paul Desmarais and the Power Corporation of Canada are certainly people that we should be more familiar with than I imagine most of us are. And if you've been following my interview feed on CorbettReport.com in the last few days, you will have at least heard a little bit on this subject. But let's start exploring it a little bit further in further detail.
Okay, he goes on to talk about the Power Corporation in more detail, which I've already covered, and then he continues.
Well, so far, so perfectly bland. Here we seem to have just another corporation that's just a feel-good story about a family that came into power in a company and managed to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and create a worldwide business conglomeration that has thrived and profited because of the careful stewardship of the family. And they've made a lot of money because of that, and apparently garnered some interesting contacts with people like ex-French President Nicolas Sarkozy. And it's certainly interesting to look at some of their connections. So to find out more about the connections of the Desmarais and how that might give us an indication of how they are able to predict the financial future so well and position themselves accordingly, let's turn to an interview that I conducted last week with Andrew Gavin Marshall of andrewgavinmarshall.com, a frequent guest on the program, and someone who has written extensively on this subject, most notably in an article that came out in May of this year called Meet Canada's Ruling Oligarchy, Parasites Aplenty. And in this article, Andrew Gavin Marshall does an admirable job of marshalling all of the information that is available there on the Power Corporation and their connections to the global power elite that is perfectly out in the open in the public record for those who seek to find it. So let's take a listen to a short excerpt from this interview with Andrew Gavin Marshall talking about the Power Corporation, the Desmarais family, and their connections to the global power elite.
Sure. I mean, the Desmarais clan, essentially our version of the Rockefellers, truly. They're a dynastic family in Canada. They rose through the patriarch, Paul Desmarais Sr., who rose to the top of Power Corporation, which was originally a utility power company, but now the name truly fits. And it's expanded largely into financial services, energy, oil. They're essentially Canada's largest corporate footprint in China. Now the two sons of Paul Desmarais Sr., André Desmarais and Paul Desmarais Jr., have really risen to the position of co-CEOs of Power Corporation. They're on several other boards. Power Corporation also has shares in GDF Suez, a major European corporation, industrial giant, essentially. They have several shares in insurance companies all across Canada. Power Financial Corporation is another subsidiary. And they have extensive reaches through think tanks. For example, Paul Desmarais Jr. is on the board of the Canadian International Council, which is the Canadian equivalent to the Council on Foreign Relations. They're also members of the Trilateral Commission, have attended meetings of the Bilderberg Group, have shared directorships at the International Advisory Board of the Council on Foreign Relations. One of the sons even served on the International Advisory Board of JP Morgan Chase for a while. So they have connections with the Rockefeller dynasty in the United States through various think tanks and corporations and boards of directors, but also they even have connections with the major European financial dynasties, including the Rothschilds. A member of a European Rothschild bank is also on the board of directors of Power Corporation. Their influence within Canada is especially interesting to the political class. There's not a single prime minister in Canada since the 1970s that is not in some way connected with the Desmarais family. So you had Pierre Elliott Trudeau, who had close connections to the Desmarais and Power Corporation, and after he left office, he joined the board of Power Corporation. Of course, Brian Mulroney rose through the ranks at Power Corp, and has been a long-time family ally. Paul Martin also rose through the ranks. Jean Chrétien's daughter married Andre Desmarais. So they're actually family connections in some instances. And then with Stephen Harper today, we also have connections through some of his ministers who have either come from Power Corporation or left to go join Power Corporation. And apparently the connections between Harper and the Desmarais were facilitated by Brian Mulroney, no less. And so they have connections also with Bob Rae from the NDP, with the Parti Québécois, so all of Canada's main political parties, and especially in Quebec, where the Desmarais family are based, right here in Montreal. And they have extensive connections with Quebec's current premier, who may not be premier for a couple more weeks, Jean Charest, and the Liberal Party here, as well as the Parti Québécois. So they really have their fingers in every dish, so to speak.
So we've touched on this, but let's explore it in some more detail. This obviously points to some sort of power structure behind the scenes that is quite different than what we are told is operating, that Canada is a democracy and that the people have an input. Obviously, there's a lot of connections going on at the top political and business levels. Why is this a problem? Why should people be concerned about this?
Well, you know, an example of that would be the food for oil scandal in Iraq, pre-war Iraq. The world were putting sanctions on Saddam Hussein in Iraq, and the company that was in charge of negotiating this so-called food for oil deal, because they were basically starving the people of Iraq. And you know, when that came out in the media, they said, okay, well, you know, we'll trade them food for oil. Well, who was in charge of that? Turns out it was a company that had ties to Power Corporation's holding firm, and that Paul Desmarais was getting rich off this food for oil deal. You know, and it's not really about money. You know, at some point, these elites get so much money that I don't think it's about money so much as it is about power. You know, that money is nothing but a tool to provide a means to control government. Okay, for example, the Paul Desmarais was involved with an organization called the Canadian Competitive Council, you know, which basically wrote the entire security and prosperity partnership agreements between the United States and Canada. I mean, this man is directly working to get Canada to divest itself of its national sovereignty. You know, people are protesting right now against the oil pipelines coming out of the tar sands project in Alberta, you know, and at the same time, these guys are investing in railways, knowing that the pipeline will never get built because they're funding the protest against the pipeline, while at the same time they're investing in extra tankers so that they could move it by rail. They never really wanted to build the pipeline in the first place. So, you know, what happens is they end up buying both sides of a conflict and playing them against each other, knowing what the outcome will be, you know, and they do the same thing in politics, you know. You could say, oh, Paul Desmarais controls the Liberal Party. Well, he controls the Conservative Party as well. And when it comes election time, it doesn't matter whether you vote Conservative or Liberal. The guy that Paul Desmarais has put in that position is still going to get elected Prime Minister. Well, you know, now you're getting into the realms of what they call the tinfoil hat stuff, okay? There's no question in my mind that people like Paul Desmarais and the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers are interested in a one-world government. I think what they want is a one-world banking system and a one-world government. Then they don't have to worry about issues of foreign ownership of corporations and the way they move their assets and their associations around. This has been long planned for through organizations like the Bohemian Grove and the Council of Foreign Relations and organizations like this.
And the Trilateral Commission, to which the Desmarais also have ties. Trilateral
Commission, exactly. And the conference that they just had in the United States, the
Bilderberg?
The Bilderberg, thank you. My mind just went blank there for a minute. The Bilderbergs, exactly. And these are all organizations that Paul Desmarais is very closely associated with, you know. And so what these people want is a one-world government. They want to consolidate everything they've got. You know, right now, these holding companies, they work with other people who are in the same position. Like a very close associate of Paul Desmarais is Belgian financier Albert Ferre, who's like the European counterpart to Paul Desmarais, and their interests get so intertwined. And you got to keep in mind, they're not only working with their own money. It's not like one rich guy with a big pile of money. These holding companies are involved in financial institutions. You know, their official stance is that they're taking care of other companies' pension funds, for example. Paul Desmarais has control over most of the pension funds in Canada.
Okay, that's all we've got for tonight. Basically, I wanted to close with my personal thoughts on this. I am a comparatively recent immigrant to this country, that is Canada. And I am A, appalled, and B, disgusted of how corrupt politics is in this country. Where I come from, and people always say, oh, it's better where I come from. No, it's not better, but there's more morals. And what is going on here would just not be tolerated in the UK. This is what I call insider trading. It's insider trading of politics. It's running one against the other, and there's no real difference between Liberals, NDP, Conservatives, whatever. They're all in the back pocket of these wealthy business people. And this goes to my second point, which is when you listen to this and you read between the lines and you listen to these billionaires talking and the control they've got in this country, this explains one simple thing. They are very, very happy in Canada to go into other countries and pilfer their wealth. In other words, they go into the United States and they buy up companies left, right and centre. But let for 1 second that any foreign entity enter into Canada and consider setting up shop. God help us. Oh my goodness, we can't have that. In other words, Canada, you can't have competition because these billionaires won't let you have competition. And competition breeds prosperity for all, it breeds choice. Where I came from, before Margaret Thatcher, there was no choice. It was Socialism 101. I've told you that previously in other podcasts. Take a listen to my first podcast if you're not sure. But this is a disgrace. And this is why Verizon's not let into the country, why British Telecom is not let into the country, why Deutsche Telekom is not let into the country, and why we pay 40% more for our cars than in the United States. Just one example. So think on that, and remember when you vote next time, it sounds to me as though it doesn't really matter. But it does. It's just that you need to vote the way that makes a difference and cuts these people out. Anyway, that's our programme for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Some of it was a bit long-winded. I apologise for that. But nevertheless, I'm sure you found it interesting, helpful. All that remains for me to say is thank you for joining us this evening. I hope you found it informative. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you have any questions, if you have any thoughts, please drop us a line. And we look forward to producing our next podcast. Thank you for joining us tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. Good night. Good night.